The TikTok saga spanned both Donald Trump's first administration and Joe Biden's administration. President Trump issued an executive order in August 2020, finding that the spread in the United States of mobile applications developed and owned by companies in China continues to threaten national security, foreign policy, and economy of the United States. Subsequently, the US Congress enacted the Protecting Americans from Foreign Adversary Controlled Applications Act 24 that made it unlawful for any entity to provide services to distribute, maintain, or update a foreign adversary controlled application in the country. Meanwhile, if the app undergoes a qualified divestiture, one where President determines that it is no longer controlled by a foreign adversary, then it will be allowed to function. TikTok was allowed to function with its existing ownership structure till January 17. In a judgment upholding the act, the court ruled that divestiture required for purpose of preventing a foreign adversary from accessing the sensitive data of 170 million TikTok users in a subtle means of exercising a content preference, adding that speakers' distinctions such as this are not presumed to be invalid under the First Amendment. Free speech is protected by the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. The government's TikTok related data collection concerns do not exist in isolation. The record reflects that China has engaged in extensive and year long efforts to accumulate structured dataset, in particular on US persons to support its intelligence and counterintelligence efforts. Even if China has not leveraged its relationship with ByteDance to access US TikTok users' data, the petitioners offer no basis for concluding that government's determination that China might do so is not at least a reasonable inference based on substantial evidence. While differing to Congress than the government, the court asserted we are mindful that this law arises in a context in which national security and foreign policy concerns arise in connection with efforts to confront evolving threats in an area where information can be difficult to obtain and import of certain conduct difficult to assess. Finally, Supreme Court of the United States concluded that the regulations promoted a substantial government interest and that the regulation did not burden substantially more speech than is necessary, and hence the law did not violate First Amendment rights. Meanwhile, Justice Sonia Sotomayor, in her concurring opinion, concluded that the act in question did implicate freedom of speech by imposing a burden on the TikTok speech in the United States. Given the majority decision, however, TikTok went off the air for 12 long hours and its 170 million American users had no access to it. But the story doesn't end here. On January 20, President Trump signed an executive order halting the TikTok ban for 75 days to permit its administration an opportunity to determine the appropriate course of action. The president has the power to delay the ban for up to 90 days. Meanwhile, urged on by Trump, an American investor group is putting together a bid to buy the social media app from ByteDance. At an election victory rally, Trump had told his supporters, "We have no choice but to save it," while suggesting that the US will own 50% of the company. The case of TikTok demonstrates how social media is the new oil, a resource valuable for the human being whose attention it captures, that constitutional courts vie to regulate it and presidents strive to emancipate it. This case must be also be read for how deftly the court navigated concerns of free speech and national security alongside the nuances of social media. The case poses questions that will undoubtedly arise in other countries as well. When an alleged foreign adversary owns a substantial swath of country citizens' data, how must the government secure it? The 75-year milestone. The state cannot absolve itself the responsibility to protect Hindu citizens and assure them to safety. The key factors behind the exodus need to be addressed, while those Pakistani Hindus that have left for India should not be given an amnesty and allowed to return home. Should be given an amnesty and allowed to return home. This year marks the 75th The year marks the 75 years of adoption of India's constitution. The government has planned year-long programs with the slogan Hamara Samvidhan, Hamara Swabhiman or Constitution our Pride at a grand inaugural event held in Central Hall of Parliament on November 26. President Draupadi Murmu called the Constitution the holiest book of our country. The making of the Constitution was an inspiring saga every Indian should be proud of. Four aspects of our Constitution should invoke the pride, the struggle that preceded it, making itself, the content, and the journey in the last 75 years. The struggle for having our own constitution began at least 25 years before the formation of the Constituent Assembly. The first ever Government of India Act of 1858 came after the 1857 War of Independence. No Indian was involved in the process. 6 decades later came a new version, the Government of India Act 1919. By then, Congress had emerged as a rallying point for all nationalists. It raised a strong voice against the act, demanding that not the British government but the Indian legislature should have the authority to draft its own constitution. The Swaraj Party parliamentary wing of the Congress raised the issue in the Legislative Assembly in 1924, demanding that a roundtable conference be convened to negotiate constitutional reforms instead of giving a sympathetic ear to the demand. Secretary of State for India Lord Birkenhead challenged Indian leaders to produce a constitution which carries behind it a fair measure of general agreement among the great people of India. He also decided to further taunt them to appoint an all British Simon Commission for the review of constitutional measures needed for India. The Congress leader accepted the challenge. Motilal Nehru led an all-party conference to draft a constitution that also had Mr. Subhash Chandra Bose, Annie Besant, M.R. Jaikar, Jawaharlal Nehru, and couple of Muslim League representatives. It came out with a draft constitution in 1928, popularly known as Nehru Report. It contained 22 chapters and 88 articles and dealt with important subjects like fundamental rights, a bicameral parliament, division of powers, judicial independence, and center state relations. It unequivocally declared that universal adult franchise will be the model of India, with every citizen 21 years of age and above securing voting rights. A new leading newspaper exclaimed that while Birkenhead got the befitting reply, "We all draw the Magna Carta of our liberty," a call was given to the Lahore session in 1929 to celebrate the Day of Independence on January 26. It was to commemorate the occasion that 26 1950 was chosen as the adoption of our Indian Constitution. The Swaraj Party passed a resolution in May 1934 demanding that a Constituent Assembly be convened to frame acceptable constitution. The Indian people heard about the Constituent Assembly first time then. The next decade saw the Congress waging battle both in the street as well as on the constitutional front. Jawaharlal Nehru was categorical that Constituent Assembly would function as a completely sovereign body. The British finally submitted to that through the India Independence Act 1947. The Constituent Assembly met for the first time in December 9, 1946. The draft constitution was placed before it on February 21, 1948. A revised version was placed on November 4. Its second reading was happened clause by clause, and the final draft was approved November 26, 1949. Unlike today, there were no time limits to the speeches of assembly members. In total, the members spoke 3.6 million words. A total of 7,635 amendments were moved, out of which 2,400 were discussed. The constitution that came out of this hard work contained 395 articles and 8 schedules. Ambedkar had to shoulder much of the burden of drafting it and incorporating thousands of amendments. Rajendra Prasad, chairman of the assembly, acknowledged this, saying, "I have realized, as nobody else could have, with what zeal and devotion the members of the drafting committee and especially its chairman, Dr. Ambedkar, despite his indifferent health, have worked." While moving the Objectives Resolution in December 1946, Jawaharlal Nehru passionately appealed that it was more than just a resolution but a declaration, a firm resolve, and a pledge, and finally a dedication. That was what the 299 members of the assembly did through the 35 months of the constitution's making. The journey of the last 75 years witnessed many important constitutional reforms like the Hindu Code Bill, incorporation of fundamental duties, introduction of decentralization and Panchayati Raj system, ending centralized planning and abrogation of Article 370. Some criticize it as a colonial constitution. However, closer look reveals that the constitution contained most elements of the Nehru Report 1928. President Murmu called it the outcome of our long freedom struggle. The constitution has served our country efficiently and effectively for 75 years, while allegations and counter allegations about who was the protector and who was a detractor abound due to political expediency. The social and religious minorities and other marginalized people see it as a great guarantor of their rights and freedoms. Our constitution has been successful in building the spirit of one nation, one people. Ultimately, the constitution is only a statement of intent. The constitutional morality acting in its spirit of those who manage it is critical. Ambedkar warned that constitutional morality is not a natural sentiment. It needs to be cultivated on the occasion. Let the nation dedicate itself the task of cultivating that morality. Threats to the Republic. Constitutional principles of freedom, equality, dignity need to be safeguarded. On January 26, 1950, India would be a democratic country in the sense that India from that day would have the government of the people, by the people and for the people. What would happen to her democratic constitution? Will she be able to maintain it or will she lose it again? B.R. Ambedkar voiced his fear in these words on November 25, 1949, during his last address to the Constituent Assembly. As we celebrate the 75th year of our Republic while also observing the 100th year of the foundation of CPI, it is a moment for deep reflection. Today, we are confronted with serious threats to the very principles that define the Republic and shape our collective future. The CPI has always been at the forefront of defending the core values of the Constitution and had a significant influence on its drafting. It was a firm proponent of a secular state, a vision shared by many of the Constitution's framers. Ambedkar warned that the Hindu Raj would be the greatest calamity for the country. At the same time, socialism was the key aspect of our vision, and the directive principles of state policy, which call it for the reduction of inequalities in income and wealth, were influenced by socialist ideals. Considering India's diversity, the framers of the constitution gave us a federal polity. The CPI also in the lead here by raising the demand for linguistic states and decentralization of power. The principle of secularism, welfare and federalism were woven into the fabric of the Indian state, but today we find that these principles are increasingly under threat. The rise of religious majoritarianism is one of the most serious threats to the republics today, undermining the foundational idea of India as a plural society. Ambedkar had warned, if there is anybody who has in his mind the project of solving the Hindu Muslim problem by force, which is another name of solving it by war in order that Muslims may be subjugated, this country would be involved in perpetually conquering them. The horrific lynching incidents of recent years show how Muslims face such warlike situation today, and the most recent example is the assault on secularism is the repeated violation of the Places of Worship Act 1991. Another equally pressing threat to the republic is increasing economic inequality. The vision of welfare state enshrined in the constitution calls for a system that would ensure not only political but economic democracy. Yet today we are witnessing the growth concentration of the wealth in the hands of few. This is also a social and political issue. The marginalized are increasingly being excluded from the benefits of growth, leading to heightened unrest and creating a fertile ground for communal politics. Whether the poor are pitted against each other based on religious identity rather than class interests. Under the directive principles of state policy, the responsibility of providing means of livelihood to all and minimizing the inequalities of income and status were squarely with the state. However, the economic policies of the current government, privatization of public assets, weakening of labor rights, and corporate agenda has exacerbated these issues. The CPI, which has always stood against such policies, calls for a complete restoration of a welfare state, core tenet of the constitution. Further, India's federal polity faces significant challenges under the BJP RSS regime. Article 1 of the constitution declares India as a union of states, but the centralization of power manifested in center legislating on state subject and misusing the colonial office of the governor to undermine democratically selected state erodes the essence of federalism. Today, we face a crisis where right wing communal politics and crony capitalism are undermining the core values of a constitution. The CPI calls upon its every citizen, every progressive force, and every true patriot to join the struggle and regain the republic for the betterment of the people of India. Let us draw inspiration from the vision of our constitution and work to ensure that it lives a living document that guarantees freedom and equality, dignity for all. Special court accepts clean chit given to Siddha Ramaiah. Jailed Gujarat journalist faces new FIR for extortion. Mahesh Langa. Goa suspends paragliding after mishap that killed tourist pilot. Tourism department says review all existing registrations. 2 weeks after two people were killed in paragliding mishap, an order issued by Kedar Nayak, to the Director of Tourism, said operations of paragliding activities, motorized and non-motorized, immediately suspended. Decision comes after 27-year-old tourist from Maharashtra and a 26-year-old pilot were killed in paragliding uh, mishap. The incident took place on January 18 when Shivani Dable, accompanied by pilots Suman Nepali, took off from a cliff at Keri and plunged into ravine. One of the cables snapped mid-flight, due to which duo lost balance and collided with rocks and crashed from a height. Mirwais Waqf panel not serious trying to push amendments. As the only Muslim majority state, reference to the Union Territory of J&K, they should have come to us to take our point of view. Quota and age related papers now must for civil services prelims. 9 of the 11 patients with unidentified illness in J&K's Rajauri unstable after toxic and Kantara row. Karnataka tightens rule for filming in protest. Properties of 11 militants from J&K attached. At home with Irfan Habib, the history keeper. He was 19 when Republic was born. In the 75 years since then, as the nation grappled with new identities and aspirations, Irfan Habib spent years uncovering India's complex history, helping generations to make sense of their present. Devyani Onyal meets Habib, one of India's most eminent historians and teachers, at his home in Aligarh as he looks back at the journey of a nation and talks of his hopes for the future. Hemmed in by an apartment block and shiny new houses, Professor Habib's home, sprawling garden in Badar Bagh in Aligarh, in an oasis, a repository of history and memories, much like its owner. As the afternoon sun travels through the veranda, garden comes to life. Three peacocks strut through the greens, the parakeets screech from the treetop. We may get many migrant birds, but I am afraid I can't identify all. My uncle was a great bird scholar, says Habib, who turns 94 this August, has chronicled the history and journey of the nation, author of The Agrarian System of Mughal India, Atlas of the Mughal Empire, Essays in Indian History Towards a Marxist Perception, Medieval India, Study of a Civilization, Economic History of Medieval India, and an Atlas of Ancient Indian History. Habib's writings have thrown a light of India's past. Habib still goes to the department 2 or 3 times a week. I go there to meet my colleagues, catch up on the gossip, and we run everyone down. For generations of students at Aligarh Muslim University, Irfan Saab on his bicycle was a familiar sight. I would always cycle to the university, say Habib. A fall of about 10 years ago put a stop to it. I fell and it was not a nice sight. So I stopped cycling. Now I go in a loudly way in a car, says Habib. In these polarized times when language is politicized and much of history is contested, the historian isn't an easy job. I think Indian historians have done fairly well. They have largely critical and their methodology most of the time have been unobjectionable. Of course, there would be tendencies both towards nationalism and regionalism is quite obvious on the question of an identity of the Indus Valley civilization. There is a whole group of historians who still insist that Indus characters carry the Sanskrit language through an objectionable objective student. This would be laughable because the symbols we found from the Indus civilization and also few sculptures do not suggest any relationship with Vedic rituals, beliefs, or ideas, but still you find there's a very strong, often officially supported position. Recently, Tamil Nadu Chief Minister M.K. Stalin offered $1 million prize to anyone who would decipher the IVC script. Clearly, there is a relationship with Tamil, but though I must say very partial relationship, but there is no such relationship at all with Sanskrit. In some writings I saw Rigveda is dated as far back as 8000 BC. It's not only impossible but ridiculous. The Rigveda is dated fairly well because of its relationship with Avesta, primary collection of Zoroastrianism on politics and political boundaries often led contestations of history. Habib says, I don't know how professional historian is bothered about political boundaries. How does it matter whether Harappa and Mohenjo-daro were in India or in Pakistan? India was one country before 1947, and in the history of India, Peshawar is as much as a part of history as Calcutta. We must recognize that whatever the present boundaries before 1947, there was a definite country recognized as India. Recognition to that perhaps goes back to the Mauryan Empire, and recognition is not shaken by partition. We have a common civilization before that time, therefore, pre 1947 history should be treated as the history of whole India. Critics of Habib and other Marxist historians often accuse them to have dominated Indian universities after independence and stifling all other voices. Well, first of all, if you go into quantitative data, how many Marxists are there in Indian historiography? And a Marxist who writes only on the basis of Marxist writings would be an absurdity. If you are studying Mughal India, you are going to go to documents, you are going to study chronicles, you are going to study what historians wrote at that time, what foreigners wrote at that time, whether you are Marxist or non-Marxist. The data is the same. Only the difference begins when it comes allowing weights to particular facts, and that is of course truly or not Marxist and non-Marxist, but all historians. Some have pointed to what they see as a shortcoming in Indian historians, an inability to engage with a larger audience. You can't manufacture facts to make history interesting. You can't manufacture facts to make history interesting. Historians only write what they know to have happened. They can't write stories, but research and making things popular go together. And I tried my hand at People's History of India. Habib had just completed his high school when India became independent and partition took place. His father, Professor Muhammad Habib, taught history at the Aligarh Muslim University. There were no riots in Aligarh. Patel had sent the Kumaon regiment, one of the ace regiments in India, to protect the Aligarh Muslim University. There was total peace here, but I would still say the Kumaon regiment was very important for us. In the months following partition, the university saw several teachers and students leaving Aligarh for Pakistan. There was a large amount of migration from the university, reducing student numbers from 3,000 to 800, but the classes never stopped, not even for a day. Comparing those days with more than occasional shutdowns that colleges see today, the university pulled through the tumultuous times, and Habib, whose interest and training in history have already begun, continued to study in Aligarh. It was his father who got him interested in Ashokan inscriptions and Brahmi script. I learned the Brahmi script from inscriptions. I was in class 8, he says. Ashoka, he says he was his favorite from the entire cast of historian characters. His father, whose subject was medieval India, was a congressman and knew Nehru well. One day in 1942, my elder brother and I were playing here, he says, pointing to the garden when suddenly a tanga came in and jumped Nehru. He took no notice of us, that disheartened me. He just came to his door, knocked on it, opened it and called out, Habib, get me a sandwich, he remembers. By the time he met Nehru next, Habib, college topper, was already teaching at the university. He scolded me at a tea party here when he was invited. I was having my tea and my fellow colleagues had dropped all kinds of things on the grass. Unfortunately, Nehru caught me and said, you call yourself an educated person, a teacher, and you throw all sorts of things on the grass. What will the gardener do tomorrow? Before I could answer, he had turned and left. His path crossed with Nehru again when Habib won a Government of India scholarship to study at Oxford, but was denied a passport. The Home Ministry refused to give me a passport. Although Pandit G.B. Pant was a friend of my father's, but then Nehru overruled him. He called me to Delhi and then decided in my favor. I wasn't issued a passport because of my membership to the CPM at Sabib, who joined the Communist Party in 1950. Now I am retired kind of a member. I used to be the president of the Employees Union of the university and used to go to negotiations, but I'm too old now. Never much of a traveler, Habib now keeps abreast of the developments in the country from his home, which he shares with his wife, a retired economics professor at AMU, and his son Faiz, who recently retired as a cartographer from a university history department. The couple have three more children: son, who is an academic, another scientist in the US, and a daughter who is a scientist. None of them are historians. From his homestead, he has seen events unfold, the recent more furore or mosque ensemble, and now closer home, a new claim on the 18th century Jama Masjid in Aligarh. Supreme Court had told the local courts not to take up such cases, but despite its order, no local court is obeying them. On December 12, the Supreme Court barred civil courts across the country from registering fresh suits challenging the ownership and title of any place of worship and from ordering surveys of disputed religious places. The Places of Worship Act was a necessity. It froze religious places as they were in 1947. The Places of Worship Act was a necessity. It froze religious places as they were in 1947. It froze religious places as they were in 1947. The Places of Worship Act froze religious places as they were in 1947. The Places of Worship Act froze religious places as they were in 1947. Places of Worship Act froze religious places as they were in 1947. Habib is concerned what he sees around him, the rewriting of history in textbooks, the forefronting and sharpening of ideologies and identities. You have taken Akbar out and put Maharana Pratap in, but how can there be a Maharana Pratap without Akbar? If you go on like this, the country does change. He says, I meet people today and they are very different from how they were in 1947 or 50s. They have succeeded in changing the psyche of the Indian people to an extent, at least to the middle class. Does he find this change in his circle too? The circle is getting shorter and shorter. He laughs because it's the question of critical perception of history, and that kind of investigation starts with certain assumptions, one of which is the absence of false nationalism. Clearly, a critical spirit is necessary for history, says Habib, who has traveled with the country's past and chronicled it for the future. He has seen the country change in myriad ways, but he says what will sustain India as a nation is the constitution. As very old man, I would go back to what one hoped for in 1947. and to the discussions on constitution. Many reforms took place after independence. For instance, landlordism of the old kind was abolished and the industrial growth of India was also established. Fight of Fancy, Skyforce, Timeless Tale, Ramayana, The Legend of Prince Rama. The anime version of the Ramayana India Japan co production is technically a re release. It was first seen briefly in the 1990s after premiering at few film festivals. The advantage of animation is that it obviates the need to balance the tricky connections between real life actors and epic counterparts. I want to talk Prime Video, the story of resilient father told with wry humor, showcases one of the Abhishek Bachchan's career best performances. Directed by filmmaker Shujit Sarkar, I Want to Talk transforms follows the transformative journey of Arjun Sen, a chatty and shrewd Bengali man living the quintessential American dream. Arjun's life is unended when he learns he has only 100 days to live. The anime version of Ramayana Indo-Japan co-production is technically a re-release. It was first seen briefly in the 1990s after premiering at a few film festivals. The remastered HD 4K version, freshly dubbed in Hindi, Tamil and Telugu, is in theaters now. The advantages of animation is that it obviates the need to balance the tricky connections between real and actors and epic counterparts in a revered down the ages text, and that's why Yugo Sako, the creator of anime film, chose the genre. The timelessness which accompanies each retelling if the filmmaking is stellar and if the intention is to stay faithful to the spirit of the epic, again on this metric the familiarity makes the viewing fun. You wait for the high points, Exile, Ram, Yudhvir Daya, the prince of Ayodhya along with Sita and Lakshman, the humiliation of Suparnakha, the abduction of Sita by Lord Ravan, the discovery of Sita's hiding place by Hanuman, the building of the Ram Setu, the battle of Ram's soldiers, and the triumphant return to Ayodhya. The backstory of the film, its making and release turned contentious at a time when Rath Yatra was at its height. There were VHP protests against non-Indians making film on a foundational epic is fascinating. The older Hindi dubbed version was voiced by a collection of Bollywood honorables, including Shatrughan Sinha as an omniscient narrator, Arjun Govill as Lord Ram and Amrish Puri as Lankesh Pati Raman. Sadly, the master data of the old discussions were lost, according to the producers, which is why they had to read dub in the Indian languages. The original English language dub, which was preserved in Japan, is still unusable. Importance of the film cannot be overstated at the present time. One of the ways to forget about misfires like Ram Setu and Adi Purish is to embrace the purity of the filmmaking in the respectful version, even if it feels overlong and stretched in places. I watched the Hindu dub and enjoyed myself. Taking yourself and your kids to get reacquainted with one of the greatest epics ever told, this battle over good over evil peppered with timeless characters and stories within stories, is a solid family entertainer. Sacred Games. See, it doesn't take off. Alaska as viewed from a plane window, many could consider that wasted opportunity, but here we are in a flight risk with Mel Gibson himself directing the script that lay in cold storage for a world which wants neither to reach too high nor too many risk. A grim reminder, the girl with a needle. Spirit willing, body weak. Injury forces Novak Djokovic to retire in the semi-final game against Zverev after conceding the first set 7-6. Australian slumps not worrying Carlsen. Sain concedes too many points in a row, struggles in a crunch. Behind combined success of Samson, Abhishek is a chemistry of a dissimilar. Ease liquidity let rupee find its own level, economists tell governor. let the rupee find its own level. That was the broad message conveyed by the senior economist to the Reserve Bank of India. Governor Sanjay Malhotra, in a meeting in Mumbai on Friday, economists are learned to have communicated to the central bank chief that RBI's current stance on rupee is the appropriate way to deal with the ongoing situation in the currency market, and RBI should allow rupee to adjust rather than hold it in one place. Two people aware of the discussion said. The key debate over whether RBI's monetary policy action should focus on quantity of money or price of money featured in the meeting. The discussions featured mainly around liquidity, interest rates, rupee, macroprudential measures of the RBI. Many participants raised the need to ease liquidity to the RBI governor, but there was no broad consensus on the method to be adopted to achieve the goal. There were many suggestions ranging from a tweak in CRR cash reserve ratio to buying selling swaps or conducting long term repo operations. While easing liquidity was cited as one of the most important requirements by the economists to the RBI, many also argued for the rate citing growth should slow down. However, it was divided house between the economists in the meeting, with those representing banks suggesting measures to ease liquidity over the rate cut. Some suggestion by economists favoring easing liquidity over a rate cut, with the view that there might be some relief on the fiscal policy front. However, others differed by saying that there may not be much fiscal space for substantive action, so monetary policy will have to take charge. The discussions with the economist in India's financial capital came with a similar meeting with economists held with the RBI governor. RBI is slated to meet chiefs of public sector and private banks early next week. These interactions are the first set of meetings with bankers and economists, and Malhotra took charge as the RBI governor in December. The meetings are crucial as they come in the backdrop of concerns over the growth slowdown and fluctuations in the Indian currency. India's GDP growth is seen slowing to a 4 year low of 6.4% in the current financial year of 24-25. While some economists have stated that RBI will exert caution in the next monetary policy meeting, others are expecting a rate cut. The RBI has kept its key policy rate unchanged at 6.5% since February 23. A strong dollar rise in crude oil prices and selling by foreign investors, strong dollar rise in crude oil prices, strong dollar rise in crude oil prices, and selling by foreign investors in the equity market are the major reasons for depreciation of rupee. Strong dollar rise in crude oil markets prices and uh, depreciation on the rupee. Since November 1, the rupee has depreciated over 2.6%. However, the rupee's fall in the last few weeks has led to the conclusion in the market that the RBI tried something, and they probably has anticipated the holding it beyond point makes no sense. Saturitization. RBI's plan to spur mutual fund investments among low income investors. Consultation paper on small ticket SIPs of 250. Competitive populism of climate change to put fiscal pressure on states. Competitive populism, climate change to put fiscal pressure on states. Sachetization or strategy of offering products in small yet affordable units has been the roaring success in India's FMCG sector, allowing FMCG majors to penetrate the price sensitive rural and low income consumer segments. Competitive populism, climate change to put fiscal pressure on states. Tata acquires Pegatron India, Sri Lanka power purchase deal intact, Halwa ceremony commences FY budget 26 printing process, Uber Ola differential pricing under scanner, does Android or US make a difference? Indian industry welcomes His Excellency Mr. Prabowo Subianto, the President of the Republic of Indonesia. US military aircraft deport migrants. Pentagon readies more border troops. Putin says he and Trump should meet to discuss Ukraine. Israeli troops stay in South Lebanon beyond Sunday's ceasefire deadline. In first trip since assuming office, Trump visits disaster zones in North Carolina. Russia repels Ukraine drone attack. After US exit, WHO prepares to slash costs, reset priorities. Hamas names 4 Israeli hostages to be released today. Belarus Belarus polls Europe's last dictator is all set for the seventh term. Gulf of what now? Trump's geographic renaming plans leave map makers confused. Wrestling Federation office is back to its old address, home of sexual harassment accused Brij Bhushan Singh. Waqf panel 10 opposition MPs suspended for protesting. PM to chair Paris Feb 10-11 co-chair AI Action Summit. Hosted in France, foreign borrowings turn dearer for India Inc. as rupee falls. How Google Cloud helped court convict Kerala women in boyfriend's murder. When Grishma, the 22, decided to kill her boyfriend, she turned to the internet, running extensive searches on her using paracetamol and herbicide, paraquat, and slow poisons. What they should not bargain for, however, was the digital footprint she had left behind. Strengthening India-Indonesia bilateral ties, civilization and cultural ties, political and strategic cooperation, economic cooperation. India and Indonesia have expanded considerably with $29.4 billion in February 23-24. Both countries are aiming to double this figure by 50 million billion by 2025. Strengthening defense ties, this defense cooperation agreement, army to army staff talks, air force to air force staff talks, and navy to navy staff talks, and exercises such as Garud Shakti and multilateral exercises like Komodo provide opportunities for both countries to enhance interoperability and strengthen their defense capabilities. The two countries' naval forces are also undertaken joint patrols in the Indian Ocean since 2002. Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation Program and Colombo plans scholarship offer training. Additionally, the Inter Council of Cultural Relations offers scholarships. Approximately 150,000 people of Indian origin residing in US, with many having migrated during the 19th and 20th century. 150th National Voters Day celebration 25th January. ISRO launched number 100 is NavSat equipped with atomic clocks developed in India. So that's all for today. See you in the next one.